Donald Trump says he barely knew Jeffrey Epstein. The public record says something more complicated. Photos, flight entries, party footage, court files, contradictions. And in America, contradictions around powerful men are rarely accidents. This is not a video about internet myth. It is not a video about fake client lists, viral screenshots, or partisan fan fiction. It is about what survives when rumor burns away. The footage, the court papers, the reporting, the timelines, and the uncomfortable fact that in the American system, access itself can be a form of protection. And if that sounds familiar, it should. Because this story is not only about Trump and Epstein, it is about the architecture of elite immunity in the United States. Before we go any further, let's establish the ground rules. Donald Trump has not been criminally charged in connection with Jeffrey Epstein's trafficking operation. The public record also shows that simply appearing in Epstein-related files is not, by itself, proof of wrongdoing. That matters because the internet has spent years turning mention into conviction, gossip into evidence, and outrage into a substitute for analysis. The records demand more discipline than that. But discipline cuts both ways, because the same record also does not support the comforting version of the story Trump has often preferred, that Epstein was basically nobody to him, a minor acquaintance, a distant creep he barely knew. Publicly available evidence shows Trump and Epstein moved in the same luxury orbit for years. They socialized in Palm Beach and New York. They were photographed together. They partied together. Trump praised him publicly. Flight records placed Trump on Epstein's plane multiple times in the 1990s. And a court filing tied one of Epstein's most famous accusers, Virginia Giuffre, to recruitment at Mar-a-Lago, Trump's club. So the real question is not, was Trump ever near Epstein? That question is already answered. The real question is, what exactly do the records show? What do they not show? And why has America spent so much time pretending those are the same thing? Tonight, we follow the paper trail. Not the meme, not the spin, not the tribal talking point, just the record. And if you're into deep history investigations like this one, subscribe to PastCipher, because some stories aren't buried by time, they're buried by power. Part 1. The world that made both men. To understand Trump and Epstein, you have to understand the ecosystem that made their friendship possible. This was not simply a relationship between two men. It was a relationship inside a class system. Late 20th century, elite America rewarded spectacle, money theater, proximity to celebrities, and sexual bragging disguised as charisma. Palm Beach, Manhattan, private jets, exclusive clubs, gated estates, pageants, parties, important people, moving between coasts, as if the rules of ordinary life were for someone else. Trump thrived in that world. Epstein weaponized it. The common denominator was not ideology, it was status. Trump was a tabloid-made mogul who turned notoriety into power. Epstein was a financier whose mystique often outpaced clear explanation of where his wealth came from. Both cultivated the aura of men who could open doors, throw parties, introduce you upward, and make moral boundaries feel provincial. In that world, warning signs often looked like social credentials. That is one of the deepest American themes in this story. Our political culture talks constantly about values, but our elite culture has long excused almost anything in the presence of glamour, money, and access. By the time Epstein was eventually recognized publicly as the predator he was, he had already spent years using that credibility shield. He had circulated through institutions that were supposed to screen for danger and instead certified prestige. And Trump was not outside that system criticizing it. He was one of its most natural products, which is why the relationship matters historically, even before you ask any criminal question. It shows how American high society normalized men whose appetites were treated as personality. It shows how proximity to power softened scrutiny, and it shows why later denials never fully erase earlier intimacy. The beginning of this story is not scandal, it is social permission. Part 2. When Trump and Epstein became publicly linked. By the late 1980s and early 1990s, Trump and Epstein were moving in the same circles, especially after Epstein acquired property in Palm Beach. Reporting and later public discussion placed their friendship in that era, with the two men becoming familiar presences in overlapping worlds of wealth, nightlife, and elite social access. PBS summarized it bluntly in 2025. They had known each other since at least the late 1980s or 1990, and were for about 15 years pretty tight. That matters because later public memory often shrank the relationship into a footnote, but the evidence doesn't describe a random handshake at a charity dinner. It describes repeat proximity, not a one-off, a pattern, and patterns are everything in historical analysis. The reason historians care about repeated public association is simple. Repeated association tells you who someone considered socially safe, useful, entertaining, or valuable. It reveals whose presence required no explanation. Trump's defenders often frame the Epstein connection as one of those things that only looks bad in hindsight, as if everyone in elite America was somehow equally unsuspecting. But hindsight is not the only issue here. Contemporary evidence shows Trump himself was comfortable being seen with Epstein, publicly and casually, for years. That alone does not prove complicity in Epstein's crimes, but it does destroy the fiction of distance, and that distinction is crucial for a serious documentary. Distance is false. Guilt is not automatically proven. Those are separate questions. The record answers the first much more clearly than the second. That is exactly why this story has been so politically combustible. Trump's opponents often jump too fast from association to certainty. Trump's defenders jump just as fast from absence of criminal charge to total innocence of judgment. Both shortcuts miss the historical core. The public record shows meaningful social closeness. Once that is admitted, the next question becomes unavoidable. How close? How visible? And how long did that closeness remain socially acceptable? Part 3. The 1992 Mar-a-Lago footage. One of the most memorable pieces of evidence is also one of the simplest. Video. In 2019, NBC archive footage from 1992 resurfaced showing Trump and Epstein together at Mar-a-Lago. The Associated Press described it plainly. Trump and Epstein were seen chatting at a party at Trump's estate. No legal filing was needed to establish that. No anonymous source, no partisan committee, just camera footage. And the power of that footage is not that it proves some hidden crime on its own. The power is that it captures tone, ease, familiarity, the kind of body language powerful men display when they are not trying to manage public perception, because at that moment, they have no reason to think they ever will need to. That footage matters historically because it undercuts the later instinct to minimize the relationship. It tells us that Epstein was not some remote figure at the edge of Trump's life. Epstein was socially comfortable enough to appear at Trump's property in a setting built around youth, glamour, and display. And if you're studying elite culture in America, that is not background noise. That is the environment. PastCipher viewers should pay attention to what stories like this reveal about memory. Public memory is often edited backward. Once a man becomes radioactive, everyone claims they barely knew him. Footage like this resists that editing. It freezes a moment before the rewrite, before the distancing, before the disclaimers, before every former friend suddenly becomes not really a friend. And that is why the 1992 tape remains important. Not because it settles everything. It doesn't. But because it settles one thing very cleanly. There was a time when Donald Trump did not behave like Jeffrey Epstein's presence around him required explanation. There was a time when it looked normal. And in America, that may be the most disturbing fact of all. Part 4. The 2002 quote that never went away. In a 2002 New York Magazine profile of Epstein, Trump spoke warmly about him and remarked that Epstein liked women on the younger side. That quote has echoed for years because it condenses the entire moral problem into one public sentence. Trump was not speaking after Epstein's downfall. He was speaking during the period of social acceptance when saying flattering things about Epstein still seemed safe. Now, defenders sometimes argue that this line is overused, and in one sense, they are right. A quote alone is not a case file, but politically and historically, it is still devastating. Why? Because it shows Trump publicly attaching his own voice to Epstein's reputation in a way that sounds admiring, not wary. It suggests familiarity with Epstein's tastes and a willingness to frame them as part of a rakish, glamorous persona rather than as a warning sign. And that gets to the deeper American issue. For decades, elite culture repackaged predatory behavior as colorful masculinity. The language was always soft focus. He's wild. He likes women. He's fun. He's eccentric. He's complicated. And because the language was soft, the systems around these men remained soft too. The real scandal was often postponed until the evidence became so overwhelming that continued denial threatened the reputation of the institutions protecting them. So no, the 2002 quote does not prove Trump knew the full scope of Epstein's crimes at that time, but it proves something that is historically revealing. Trump was willing to publicly vouch for Epstein's social appeal, while casually referencing a preference that, in retrospect, sounds morally chilling. That is not criminal proof. It is character evidence of an era. And in documentaries like this, eras matter. Because sometimes the sentence that matters most is not the one spoken in court. It's the one spoken before anyone thought the bill would ever come due. Part 5. The flight records. Now we come to one of the most argued pieces of the record, the flights. Reuters reported in 2025 that flight logs presented as evidence at Ghislaine Maxwell's trial showed Trump's name on Epstein passenger lists at least 6 times in 1993 and 1994. Later, Reuters reported that a newly released prosecutor email said the records showed Trump flew on Epstein's private jet 8 times in the 1990s, more than previously reported. Those later records also said there was no allegation in the prosecutor's email that Trump committed any crime. This is one of those moments where serious analysis must reject both propaganda versions at once. Version 1 says, Trump was on the plane, therefore, that proves everything. False. Version 2 says, it was just a few flights between Palm Beach and New York, so it means nothing. Also false. It means what repeated private travel between socially close men usually means a real relationship, sustained enough to involve shared movement through elite space. Maybe not the lurid fantasy the internet wants, but also not the flimsy acquaintance story. The plane matters because planes are intimate ecosystems of trust. They are not public ballrooms where strangers drift in and out. Being on the plane repeatedly tells us the association was operational, not merely decorative. Trump, for his part, wrote in 2024 that he was never on Epstein's plane. Reuters explicitly contrasted that denial with the flight records introduced in the Maxwell case and with the later prosecutor email describing 8 flights. That contradiction matters, even if one argues over the exact count: 6, 7, 8 entries. The larger point stands. The public record does not support a blanket denial. And notice what a mature reading of the evidence sounds like. The flight records do not prove Trump participated in Epstein's trafficking crimes, but they do strongly undermine efforts to portray Trump as socially distant from Epstein. Again, the record is narrower than rumor, but harsher than denial. Part 6. Mar-a-Lago and Virginia Giuffre. The Mar-a-Lago connection is where this story stops being merely social and starts intersecting directly with the trafficking narrative. A court filing in the Giuffre-Maxwell litigation referenced the allegation that Ghislaine Maxwell approached Virginia Giuffre while she was an underage employee at Mar-a-Lago and recruited her under the pretense of providing massage work for Epstein. The Associated Press later reported that Trump himself said Epstein had stolen young women from the Mar-a-Lago spa and acknowledged that one of them was Virginia Giuffre. Pause there. That does not mean the public record proves Trump knowingly facilitated trafficking. It does not. But it does mean that Trump's club appears in one of the most important origin points of the Epstein story. In the public record, Mar-a-Lago is not just a fancy backdrop. It is one of the locations where the social world of elite men intersected with the vulnerability of a teenage girl. And that is historically enormous. Because American scandals involving the rich are often narrated as if exploitation happens in some separate underworld, some hidden basement beneath respectable life, the Epstein story keeps showing the opposite. The underworld was often adjacent to the chandelier. It could operate near private clubs, famous names, and institutions designed to signal exclusivity and safety. The setting was not marginal. It was elite. There is also an important fairness point here. AP noted that in the 2024 unsealed documents, Giuffre did not accuse Trump of wrongdoing, and she corrected earlier media misstatements attributed to her. That matters, and it should be said clearly. But even with that clarification, the Mar-a-Lago recruitment story remains deeply significant because it places Trump's social world in direct proximity to the machinery that trapped one of Epstein's best-known accusers. The lesson is uncomfortable, but it is not complicated. Powerful spaces do not become innocent simply because the powerful own them. Sometimes they become useful precisely because the powerful own them. Part 7. So, why did Trump and Epstein split? If the friendship was real, the next question is obvious. Why did it end? Here the public record becomes murkier. PBS summarized one widely reported version. The major break came around 2004, when Trump and Epstein became rivals over a Palm Beach mansion. The Washington Post similarly reported that the two men squared off over an oceanfront property, and that Trump has never clearly explained the rupture beyond saying it happened about 15 years before Epstein's 2019 death. Later, Trump offered another explanation, that Epstein stole employees from Mar-a-Lago and was barred after that. AP reported Trump saying that included Virginia Giuffre and other young women from the spa. That explanation drew fresh scrutiny because it seemed to place Trump closer to key facts than his earlier, vaguer distancing suggested. And this is where a documentary should slow down and resist easy certainty. Do the records show Trump broke with Epstein for moral reasons? Not clearly. Do the records show a business and status rivalry around the mansion? Yes. That explanation is well grounded in reporting. Do later statements from Trump suggest the rupture also involved staff poaching and young women around Mar-a-Lago? Yes. His own words moved in that direction. What we don't have is a single clean archival answer everyone agrees on. What we have is a tangle of explanations, which is exactly what often happens when public figures rewrite uncomfortable relationships after the fact. The falling out story becomes unstable because each new version is serving a political need in the present. And politically, that instability matters. Because if Trump's break with Epstein was primarily over a real estate rivalry, that tells one story. If it was also tied to Epstein's behavior toward young female staff, that tells another. The gap between those stories is the gap between rivalry and alarm. The public record does not resolve that gap cleanly, but it does tell us something else. Trump's own explanations have evolved. And when explanations evolve under pressure, historians pay attention. Part 8, the Acosta chapter and the American system. Now step back from the personal relationship and look at the state. In 2008, Epstein received a plea deal in Florida that became notorious for its leniency. Years later, renewed scrutiny over that deal exploded during Trump's presidency because Alex Acosta, the federal prosecutor tied to that non-prosecution agreement, was serving as Trump's labor secretary. Reuters and AP both reported that Acosta resigned in 2019 amid the backlash over how Epstein's case had been handled. This is where the story stops being only about association and starts becoming a story about institutions. Because one of the deepest reasons the Epstein saga never stays confined to celebrity gossip is that it repeatedly reveals how formal power and informal power protect each other. Prosecutorial discretion, political loyalty, class privilege, reputation management, these are not side notes. They are the mechanism. The question is not only, who knew Epstein? The question is, why did so many systems fail to treat his predation with the urgency it deserved? In Trump's case, Acosta's presence in the cabinet created an especially brutal symbolic link. Even if Trump himself did not engineer the original plea deal, the optics were devastating. The administration of a man with a documented social history with Epstein included a senior official tied to one of the most criticized institutional failures in the Epstein story. That is not proof of conspiracy, but it is a case study in how power clusters, the same circles keep reappearing, the same names keep inheriting the clean rooms of American legitimacy. This is why so many Americans across ideological lines remain suspicious. Not because all suspicions are equally grounded, they are not, but because the system has repeatedly taught the public that elite protection is real, sometimes messily real, sometimes officially real, sometimes signed and stamped. And when that is your political background, every friendship, every flight log, every vague denial lands differently, not as isolated trivia, as part of a national pattern. Part 9, 2019, Arrest, Death, and Distancing. When Epstein was arrested again in 2019 on federal sex trafficking charges, the old social history between him and Trump came roaring back into public consciousness. Trump's public posture shifted into distancing mode. Reuters summarized Trump's position as saying he had not spoken to Epstein in many years and was never aware of Epstein's abuse. PBS noted that after Epstein's death, Trump said he had not talked to him in about 15 years and that there was no public evidence contradicting that claim. On its own terms, that may be true. But notice what kind of truth it is. A truth about when they last spoke, not about how close they once were. This is a familiar maneuver in American scandal management. A public figure does not deny every fact. He narrows the frame to the one fact he thinks he can survive. So the story becomes, I hadn't seen him in years. But that answer can coexist with a long period of earlier intimacy. The legal danger may be in the present. The reputational damage often lives in the past. That is why 2019 was such a turning point. It forced Trump's supporters, critics, and the media to grapple with two timelines at once. The first timeline said Trump and Epstein had broken years earlier. The second timeline said they had once been close enough that footage, quotes, party appearances, and flight entries were now impossible to ignore. Both timelines could be true at the same time. And politically, that was exactly the problem. In a healthier political culture, that contradiction would trigger a patient demand for facts. In ours, it triggered a civil war of narratives. One side wanted instant conviction. The other side wanted instant absolution. And neither impulse helps much if your actual question is the title of this video. What do the records show? Part 10. The 2024 Unsealed Documents and the Misinformation Trap. In early 2024, more Epstein-related court records were unsealed, and social media reacted the way social media always reacts, by lying at scale. The Associated Press warned that people were falsely treating these documents as some kind of definitive client list or proof sheet. A P also stressed that most of the people named were not accused of wrongdoing simply because their names appeared in the papers. In Trump's case, AP noted that both Trump and Bill Clinton appeared in the court file, in part because Giuffre was asked about inaccuracies in prior news stories. And Giuffre said she had not accused either former president of wrongdoing in that context. This section matters because it protects the credibility of everything else. If you want to make a serious case about Trump and Epstein, you have to reject sloppy overclaiming. The public deserves better than fake screenshots, fabricated quotes, or the lazy assumption that every appearance of a famous name is equivalent to criminal evidence. That is not accountability. That is contamination. And contamination is politically useful to the powerful because it lets them dismiss grounded evidence as just one more wild conspiracy. At the same time, the 2024 release did not exonerate Trump in any broad moral sense either. It kept reinforcing the underlying point. Trump was part of Epstein's social universe. His name belonged in the documentary record because the relationship itself was historically real. The mistake is not saying Trump appears in the files. The mistake is pretending that appearance alone settles every question. So here is the historian's rule. When evidence is weak, say it is weak. When evidence is strong, say it is strong. When the internet wants you to flatten those distinctions, refuse. That is how you keep the truth from becoming just another casualty of the scandal economy. Part 11, the 2025 and 2026 releases. What changed? Then came the later disclosures. Reuters reported in late 2025 that a newly released prosecutor email said Trump had flown on Epstein's jet 8 times in the 1990s, more than had previously been reported. The same Reuters report said there was no allegation in that prosecutor email that Trump committed a crime. It also said the Justice Department warned that some documents contained untrue or sensationalist claims. In early 2026, Reuters summarized broader file releases by saying Trump socialized extensively with Epstein in the 1990s and 2000s, that trial evidence indicated multiple flights, and that the files included photos and other references, but again, not a criminal case against Trump arising from those materials alone. AP and Reuters also covered another important development in March 2026. The Justice Department released previously missing FBI interview summaries involving a woman who made accusations against Trump. AP described those accusations as uncorroborated, and Reuters reported the department itself warned that some of the claims in the files could be false or sensationalist. That is important because it means the newest records expanded the universe of allegations without converting them into proven fact. So what changed? First, the later releases made the social history harder to minimize. Second, they deepened the documentary trail around flights, photos, and references. Third, they also made the evidentiary landscape noisier by mixing grounded material with unverified claims, which is exactly why discipline matters even more now. In other words, the newer records did not transform this into a simple courtroom narrative. They made it messier, wider, and more politically explosive. They strengthened the case that Trump's relationship with Epstein was deeper than minimizers admit. They did not produce a neat, universally accepted smoking gun proving criminal participation in Epstein's trafficking network. If that frustrates you, good. It should, because frustration is the emotional signature of a public trying to read history through a system built to blur it. Part 12. What the records do show. By this point, we can say several things with confidence. The records show Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein were socially connected for years. They show Trump publicly praised Epstein in 2002. They show Trump and Epstein together in 1992 footage at Mar-a-Lago. They show Trump's name on Epstein-related flight records multiple times in the 1990s. They show Trump's club, Mar-a-Lago, appearing in the background of Virginia Giuffre's recruitment story. They show Trump later offering shifting, or at least evolving explanations for why his relationship with Epstein ended. And they show that later government releases kept generating politically damaging reminders of all of the above. That is already a substantial historical record, and if you're judging public leadership, that record matters even before you reach criminal standards. Presidents are not only measured by indictable acts, they are measured by judgment, by truthfulness, by consistency, by the company they keep, by what they normalize, by what they later deny, and by how hard they try to manage public memory when the past becomes inconvenient. From that angle, the story is grim. The records do not present Trump as an accidental bystander who was once photographed with the wrong man at the wrong gala. They present him as someone who belonged to the same elite social theater and later had to politically survive its aftershocks. That is a very different thing. And for a country that claims to value character in leadership, that should be enough to provoke serious moral scrutiny. Not hysterical scrutiny, serious scrutiny, the kind built on fact, pattern, and institutional memory, the kind America too often postpones until the bodies pile up and the records become impossible to ignore. Part 13. What the records do not show. Now, for the other half, the half that keeps this honest. The records do not currently establish, in any clean legal sense, that Trump was charged for participating in Epstein's trafficking crimes. OP warned in 2024 against treating names in the files as proof of wrongdoing. Reuters, in both 2025 and 2026 reporting, repeatedly noted that Trump was not accused of wrongdoing in the specific materials they were describing, even while reporting socially damaging details like flights, photos, and references. The records also contain facts that complicate the most extreme anti-Trump narrative. Washington Post reported that Brad Edwards, an attorney for some Epstein victims, said Trump was the only person among Epstein's associates who picked up the phone and was helpful with information in 2009. And AP emphasized that Giuffre did not accuse Trump of wrongdoing in the court materials discussed in the 2024 release. Those details matter because truth that only cuts one direction is usually propaganda. So, if you are building a serious argument, here is the disciplined version. The public record is deeply damaging to Trump's claims of distance. It is damaging to his judgment. It is damaging to his credibility. It is damaging to the mythology that he existed outside the elite rot Epstein exploited. But the record is still not the same thing as a completed criminal case, proving every internet allegation people want to attach to his name. Some 2,026 allegations remain explicitly uncorroborated in AP and Reuters reporting. And saying that out loud is not weakness, it is intellectual hygiene. Because the moment you overstate the case, you hand the defense an escape hatch. And powerful men love escape hatches. The stronger critique is the harder one. You don't need fantasy to make this look bad. The documented history is already bad enough. Part 14. What this says about America. At this point, the story widens again. Why does America keep producing scandals like this? Why do they always seem to orbit the same ingredients? Money, celebrity, institutions, girls, denials, sealed records, image management, and political tribalism? Because the United States has never fully solved the problem of elite impunity. It has only rebranded it, digitized it, and televised it. The Epstein story exposed that. The Trump chapter of the Epstein story intensified it, not because Trump invented the system, but because he mastered its language. Deny broadly, concede narrowly, attack the press, turn scrutiny into persecution, and make every question feel partisan before it can become moral. That is why this issue keeps crossing party lines. Trump's critics see hypocrisy and moral rot. Parts of Trump's own base have also reacted angrily when disclosures felt incomplete or evasive. Reuters reported that the Epstein files became a political problem for Trump, not only with Democrats, but with members of his own coalition demanding fuller release and transparency. And maybe that is the one hopeful detail in an otherwise bleak American pattern. Sometimes a scandal becomes so revealing that the normal, tribal machinery can't contain it. Sometimes the public can still sense, however imperfectly, that something larger is at stake. Not just, did this politician lie? But, what kind of republic keeps producing men like this, protecting men like this, and then acting shocked when the records finally surface? That question is bigger than Trump, bigger than Epstein, bigger than one election cycle. It is a question about whether the American ruling class is ever meaningfully punished for treating ordinary human beings as disposable scenery in the theater of power. So, what do the records show? They show that Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein were not strangers. They show a real social relationship, visible over time. They show party footage, public praise, flight entries, overlapping circles, and and a disturbing intersection between Epstein's recruitment pipeline and Trump's club. They show evolving explanations, incomplete disclosures, and a national information environment so degraded that truth has to fight its way through both hysteria and denial. They do not show the clean, cinematic ending many people want. No single page closes the case. No one viral post resolves the contradiction. What survives instead is something more American than a smoking gun, a thick fog of privilege, partial records, institutional failure, and just enough evidence to destroy innocence without fully satisfying justice. And maybe that is the darkest answer of all. Because in a healthier country, the standard for leadership would not be, can he beat the allegation? It would be, why was he anywhere near this world for so long, and why did so many people accept it? That question still hangs over Donald Trump and over the institutions that made both Trump and Epstein possible. If you want more long-form investigations that trace power through history, memory, and myth, subscribe to PastCipher, because the past is never dead. In America, it just hires better lawyers.